So Sabrina, we're talking about the movie that you did in connection with Global Prayers on Arte, 50 minutes, on the Berlin Project, a church in Berlin, but also on a church in Nigeria, and also on a Muslim community in Istanbul. And the work was on the intersection between religion and the city, one could say. Mm-hmm. And so you approach this topic, and I'm sure you do different other topics as well. You're not specific on religion. But my first question is, did you reflect in any more substantial way about your personal background or biases or presuppositions on religion before you did that? And if so, in which way? And what were kind of some outcomes? I mean, not so specific, because that's a personal thing too, but just as a general orientation.
What exactly do you mean by check? Did I check it?
Yeah, or did you have a more, how did you deal with your biases and presupposition that you have towards the topic?
Well, as Katrin said, I was initiated to make this film by the Global Prayers Research Project. And one thing that I really liked about the project is that I had the impression that they really tried to work without biases or to be very aware of their biases and not to have the usual effect against the religious, but to say, look, there is a lot happening around the world, and before we judge it, we have to take a close look at what exactly is happening worldwide. And that was basically the mode that I tried to have in the film as well.
Mm-hmm. And but you come, obviously, as a person, you come with all kinds of your own biases and background and all whatever to the topic. So you make kind of a conscious decision to have a new, fresh look, so to speak. Is that true, or what would you say?
Well, I would say the first interest is to have a look. Mm-hmm. And to talk to people that are involved in the subject I'm talking about. And then, of course, I can influence who speaks in which way. Mm-hmm. That is exactly of which parts of the interview do I take, for example, and who can speak in which way and how long and what can they say. And then also, of course, I try to have to learn something myself and to discover new terror for myself.
Yeah. Okay. But would you, for example, have disclosed some of your personal, hesitations or backgrounds or starting points to people that you talked to the people that you interviewed? In which way, or would you do that, or would you have done that? I mean, I'm not the only one you talk to. Mm-hmm. Or is that not necessary, you think, or what do you think?
I don't remember. Did I do it?
With me, I would say you didn't do it in the beginning, but when the kind of conversations we had were quite discussion-oriented, I would say. They were not just asking questions I would answer, it was a back and forward. So there were opportunities for me to gauge a little bit where you're coming from. Mm-hmm. But I was asking for it, I would say.
I mean, normally the situation in which we met during the shooting is that I ask the questions and you have to answer. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, I have the privilege of not having to disclose myself. And it's really up to me how much I want to do it. And I would say it really depends very much on the situation and then of the kind of relation I have to my interview partner.
But exactly, that's an interesting point for me, because I'm thinking that I would agree with that, with my experience with different journalists, that there's always this situation that the journalist can kind of hide behind the institution he's coming from or whatever, or just the setting. But is that I was wondering, is that a good approach, because it's kind of coming from this old framework where we think that where maybe it's not necessary to disclose your own perception too much towards things. But every journalist that I've ever talked to had a very specific view on religion and church. So what do you think? Would that be good to include in general? Would that be good to change the perception of a journalist there? Or I don't know.
I think there is a difference. You have to differentiate between what you disclose in the film of your subjective view or of the position you're speaking from, or within the context of the shooting or the people you're meeting or the interview. And I think that there are very different modes of approaching it and very different modes of documentary filmmaking. It can be very subjective. The format that I worked for Arte is not really a subjective format, and I often think that it's better to keep the terrain neutral, that it is not even productive if I disclose too much of where do I come from, what are my opinions. Of course, in this specific setting, I always wondered, should I disclose myself as a non-religious person? But what would be the benefit of it? How important is it for you to know whether I'm religious or not? Is it important? Is it important for you where I come from?
Well, I know you a little bit better personally, and I know that you have some strong reactions towards religion in the past. Sometimes I would say so. If somebody who has who would say that he or she has a general affect against religion, which is to me more than just saying I'm a non-religious person. To say I'm a non-religious person is still quite neutral, I would say. While that is already quite a strong statement. That is me, because it sounds very much more intense, at least in my ears, if I would say it towards non-religion. If I would say I have a general affect, like whatever emotional reaction or whatever gegen non-religious people. If you put it in the reverse, I think it reveals a little bit how it's quite a strong statement or quite a strong starting point. And but maybe maybe we go a little bit from there to another topic, and that is you said that there are different modes of documentaries. Some where people come with a very fixed perspective, I assume, and just put them into a film, or others that want to be surprised and really explore. And I definitely had the impression that you were more coming from the latter pole, so to speak, if these could be two opposing poles. Were you surprised in the making of the movie about some things you said, or were all your stereotypes kind of confirmed?
Some stereotypes were reaffirmed, but there was a change definitely in a process for me during the making of the film, and that was mainly realizing that the position of a secularized fundamentalism that Werner Schiffauer talked about, that in the end that's me. And that was some kind of a turning point to come to that recognition that there is fundamentalism also on the other side, and that I myself a very good representative of that side.
Interesting. Okay.
But I would like to go back to the question how important it is for you to know your vis-a-vis in a journalistic or filmmaking process. And maybe to make it more specific, after you first agreed to make the film, you withdraw your agreement. Why?
That has a lot to do with the fact that we had a bad experience at the church, and me personally beforehand, where I had the impression that I was misrepresented in a newspaper article. And there was a story about 3 different churches. We were one of the 3, and we were made to fit into that pattern, I think, personally. And in order to that, there had to be some bending been done, had to happen, and of facts and information, and I think that happened. And I had the thorough impression that at least this journalist comes with a predefined pattern, what she wants to convey. She already has her story in her head, and then we talk for an hour, and she takes the bits and pieces that lends themselves most closely to her already predefined story. So that was kind of the impression that I had, and also if you just start on the green field, I'm thinking, okay, what could be a good story about Berlin Project? You know, of course, I think it's a great story that there are people that are exploring the faith in the city center of Berlin, but that has no conflict, it has no tension, you know, that story has been there. So I'm kind of guessing that somebody comes from some more controversial angle, and I'm wondering if that happens, what I just described, then blowing a controversial topic out of proportion.
So that was your assumption? That
was my assumption. And then I agreed again to do it with you because you explained yourself a little bit more, and because I also thought that you would do it anyway. I thought that you would do and write or have Berlin Project as part of the movie anyway, and so I thought I'd better talk with you and be part of the conversation then, to make my perspective on things known, instead of not having anything to say.
But what is your motivation at all to participate in a documentary? If we come back to the term that Katrin just used, knowledge production, is your interest just to show you are transparent as a community, you have nothing to hide? Is that the gesture that is most important for you?
Well,
or is it the attempt to have influence in the representation of Berlin Project or yourself? Or do you really want to generate a certain or have influence on the public view on the Berlin Project?
Well, I think that if I was concerned, I could not have anybody report on Berlin Project at all, because we see ourselves more locally active for Mitte, Prenzlauer Berg, Friedrichshain, and Kreuzberg in the city center of Berlin. And I'm really not concerned so much about the general public, because from our experience it only attracts other Christians that are dissatisfied with their church or something like this, and that's not necessarily what we, from all over the place, that's not necessarily what we want to. But then once the stone starts to roll, so to speak, I want to be part of it, because then I have an ability to really express in my own words what Berlin Project stands for. Yeah.
But if you don't have any interest in the public, as to use it generally, why do you not go on and meet and pray privately at home? You are in a very public space, in the Babylon Kino and Beta Haus in Kreuzberg. You automatically address the public because it's a public event. Everybody can come, can walk in and walk out.
But that doesn't happen. It's not the case. It's a wrong observation. That just doesn't happen. Just because we are in a public space, it doesn't mean that people walk in. There are no people that walk in. Never, hardly ever. Maybe one person a year. And also the perception that we are in a public space because we want to have publicity is also an assumption, which is not true, because we don't want to. The thing is that we are in a public space because we want to bring the faith back into places where the people that practice the faith also live during the week. Because we don't want to have the separation between the sacred, if you want to put it in these terms, and the profane. Because we think it's a stupid separation, because I remain a Christian, I maintain to be a Christian also when I'm watching a movie in the Babylon. Why not having it there? So if it's really not about the Babylon, it could also be the Kino in the Kulturbrauerei somewhere else. So it doesn't have to be 2 blocks away from the headquarters of the Communistic Party of Germany, if you want to put it this stark. That's really an accident, so to speak, and we have no problem with that and no signifying wish with that.
But do you conceive of yourself as a public person, as someone who is speaking to the public and maybe influencing the public on certain views, especially on religious views? Or do you rather have the feeling it's a little private gathering and okay, it's 500 people, but it's still a closed circle, so to speak?
I think it's an interest group. It's a group of people that have an interest in faith and are looking for contemporary expression. And then to them I want to speak, and with them I want to and be involved. But it's not. There is not a single instance in the history of Berlin Project of using public media to even invite to our worship services. Other churches invite through advertisement in the subway or something like this, hand out flyers. Never had a flyer. We don't do anything on the Alexander Square, singing songs and inviting people. There's just not this interest. If somebody is interested in it, he will find us through the internet or through a friend.
Do you conceive of the Berlin Project as a place of knowledge production?
I think that the Berlin Project, through the sermons that are being preached and then put online, is a resource for a certain brand of Christianity, if you want to put it this way. It has become a go-to place for people that are looking for a certain expression of the faith in secular setting, and then they listen to the sermons and stuff like this. It's nothing academic. It's not an academic resource, but it's a resource for people that are looking for that kind of intersection, for for Christianity in today's world, so to speak.
But if you want, you could say there is a parallel in the way I worked with you, mainly that I have a definition, a power of definition. We have a long interview, I take only certain parts, I decide which pictures I take, which images combined with which words of yours, etc. But you also have that kind of control because it's you who decides which sermon do you take, which prayer do you speak.
Absolutely,
what
absolutely.
Is the, what
There's
is
just
the
one difference,
subject
just
of
tiny
your
little difference. That I'm talking to 500 people or maybe 700 people when it comes, if you count in the downloaded sermons. But you're talking to 100,000 people, plus you have the backing of a brand that is very well regarded in Germany and France, and that's Arte. Yeah, so, I mean, and then you did a great job from my perspective because you really looked, and we had a fair involvement, and I was really, I didn't feel misrepresented in any way, shape, or form in what came out of it. But you do have so much more power in that setting than I have. Like infinitely more power.
Did it frighten you?
A little bit, because I have made bad experiences with that, and I also think it is. I'm also thinking it must be hard to understand what we are talking about for somebody who is not familiar with spiritual expression so much.
But do you feel you also could instrumentalize me? I mean, it's not only me who speaks to 100,000 people who watch the documentary, but you also speak. Was it tempting for you that you can address via the documentary such a big audience?
It was tempting in that regard that, I mean, I definitely want to get across the things that I truly stand for in my own words. You know, I think that's very attractive. Once as I said again, once the stone starts to roll, once you initiate it, once the question of the media is on, I want to have the opportunity to not only be described, but to describe myself, because I think that's the most direct. And I think that the nuances of faith are very subtle, particularly for somebody who's new to the topic. So it's great to be able to express myself. But then again, in the practical world of it, we had an interview that stretched for about an hour and a half or 2 hours, and what ended up in the video, in the movie, was about 5 minutes of myself, which is, all right, I mean, it's great, but you picked it, you know, I mean, you entirely picked it. And in an hour and a half, I think a lot can happen in an hour and a half. So if you wanted to, you could have easily put it in different contexts, and that's what happens also sometimes.
But do you feel you have any control in the making? Or did you feel completely...
I have control over my own words, and when you came to the office, I was prepared. I had thought about a couple questions that we had talked about earlier. I didn't want to just blah, blah, blah. I wanted to know what I'm saying and be sure that it reflects the project, yeah.
But I think that's very interesting, the difference you make between being described and describing yourself. Mm-hmm. How would you describe it after the making of the movie or after having seen the documentary? Do you feel you could describe yourself in the Berlin project, or you have been described by me?
I feel very much described, but I feel very much described, so to speak, instead of having been able to describe myself. But again, as I didn't feel misrepresented, and I didn't feel misrepresented. I was happy and pleased with it. Yeah. But I'd like to know, are you aware of that power that you have when you do a TV documentary, and if so, in which way, and do you want to use it, and if so, for which end? That would be an interesting question for me.
Of course, I'm aware of it, mm-hmm. And it's a power, but it's also a torture, because I'm sitting there with 15 interviews of an hour and a half, and I have to pick, tiny bits and pieces and to make the thing work. And it was something that Stefan and I discussed during the whole making of the documentary. What is our voice? Do we take a stand, or do we try to let the people speak? And of course, as I said, who I choose with which statement is a speaking of myself or of both of us in this case. but still you can have a commentary that is more opinionated or where you take a clear stand, and that is what we tried not to do, really following the gesture of the Global Prayers research project and of their approach.
But so when you do a documentary, that means that you want to influence the public opinion.
That's an interesting question. I think influence is, of course, I want to put subjects that I find, I would say my first wish is to put subjects out there that I find important. As for example, I do a lot of feminist stuff, which is very difficult to get done in a public TV station, or to do things on queer issues or on anti-racist issues that I find important, and I feel I have a platform where I can at least, if of these 100,000 people, 5 will start to rethink what they thought before, I'm happy. So I wouldn't say I want to influence, I rather want to put subjects out there and make people think about it, and of course.
But why would it be so bad to say that you want to influence? I mean, because I mean, isn't that the same thing that you're saying when you say I want to put my topics out? Because you're not just saying the topic; you're saying them from your perspective, of course. So, but why do you feel the hesitation to say that? That you shape public opinion, or that you can and want to?
I definitely shape public opinion. That I would agree. Influence public opinion to me has an undertone of being manipulative, which I try not to be and to work in a different way. But it's a question that I can give back to you. Do you feel that you can influence your community?
Oh yeah, I can influence my community. Yeah, that I can honestly say.
Do you want to influence them?
Yes, I do want to, because the good thing with the church is, if it's a well organized and well run church, from my personal perspective, is that you say what you stand for, that you say what is important in the church. So if you go to our website, you find 5 core purposes that the church stands for, and also you have actually dedicated seminars where you tell people what this church is all about, you know, so that people, because there are different kind of churches, so and not everybody will like your approach, and in order to just have it out there, you say it. So I do want to influence people, yes.
Is there a difference then between the pastor of the Berlin project who takes influence, or the private person Christian Nowatzky who takes influence?
Yes, there is a difference, because sometimes there are things that I see in people that I would not do so myself, that I, like I would tell a friend that I don't like the way he eats, for example, but I would never tell somebody in the church that I don't like the way he eats, or I hear him chewing, or something like this,
That's a very basic example. How about political opinions? How about if we go to the
exactly, it's a good,
difficult issues?
Let's exactly
how
take
about
that.
things like abortion?
But we can take both, but the political issue is a good example, for example, because I have to make my mark on that sheet of paper when I go to the voting box myself. I cannot make a mark everywhere. So Christian Nowatzky, of course, has to make a decision. But for the people in the church, I don't have to make a decision. But already that is a decision on how to run a church. And that's very typical for Berlin Project. We don't say people how to behave or how to think about all these kind of issues. You will never find any sermon where I would say anybody how to vote. Same with homosexuality, same with abortion.
But have these ever been subjects?
No, have not in my sermons. And this is exactly the point that we also talked about, but maybe we're going too much in detail about the church.
But don't you want to give religious guidance in these
exactly.
issues, which might be difficult?
But we're exactly at the core of this, because you as an outsider that is not familiar with the core experience of spirituality must think, it's my assumption, that church is, in the end, about having a political influence and giving guidance on those kind of things. But that's not true. The church is, in its essence, about a spiritual encounter with Christ or with God. It's a very spiritual experience. It's an experience of grace. And then you have people in the rows, somebody that had 3 abortions, somebody that would never have an abortion, You have a transgender person. You have somebody who thinks homosexuality is not right according to the Bible. You have somebody who votes CDU, and you have somebody who votes Die Linke. Yeah? So and you have a plurality.
And you have Christian Nowatzky, who has its own position.
Exactly, who has to make his own statement on a voting sheet. But I don't have to do that as a pastor. Actually, I must not do that as a pastor, because if I would do that, that position that I have, half of the church would leave. And all of a sudden, the church would be an institution that's defined by certain positions on social issues, instead of defined on having a spiritual encounter with Christ.
But isn't it the case that these newer movements, religious movements or communities, for me a big difference, I mean, I've been to many services, is that they do address contemporary issues, that they do address also things like environment or sexuality or subjects that might be of interest to the lives of the people they are talking to, and that how can you talk about these things without taking any stance? Or how is it if someone addresses you, if someone comes to you as a pastor and says, look, I got pregnant, I don't want to be pregnant,
but you have listened to
how
our
can I do it?
You have listened to our sermons. Our sermons are not concerned so much with the ethical aspects of the Christian faith. It's a very small percentage of the messages. They are really concerned with the existential experience of Christ, and how it relates to self-esteem, to being strong in the world, to be to just be loving and forgiving. So it has general implications on ethics, but they are not so specific. And you have listened to a couple of them. It's a typical style that we do. But yet again, I would say, bring it back to the power question. I'm talking to 700 people. You're talking with your movie to 100,000 people, and it's a very and that's the situation we both come with to the table. And so there is a steep power difference on our table that we're talking about, I would say. And
you mean between the two of us?
In the setting of an interview where you start to observe and learn about the church, there's a steep power difference. And I find that important to realize. And because when you say you want to shape public opinion, that means that in certain ways you have to regard yourself outside of the mainstream of public opinion. So you have a distinct look. So, but amongst the two of us, only one is giving the opportunity to express that in very profound ways. That is you.
That is in the context of my filmmaking. In the context of your church, there is a huge difference as well, because the people that sit in front of the TV, they don't give a shit about me as a person. They don't give a shit about whether they trust me or they believe in my integrity. Whether the people that you talk to, they trust you deeply, and you do have a very great authority to them.
But that's an interesting point, because that's what I find so startling about journalism and about this business of movie making, that you as a person always will not really appear. So the assumption that's being created is that this is a more or less neutral art, publicly funded mainstream production, but then somebody is behind that could be possibly quite extreme in his views. And so that's never disclosed, never discussed. Sabrina Dittus, I mean, I know she's not really extreme, but but it could be. And once that happened, it's for 7 days on Arte, it's being published somewhere, and you have never a chance to catch that back again as somebody who possibly was displayed in the wrong way. And that, I find that quite interesting about that power difference, you know.
But given that take on the filmmaking process, all the more surprised that you do participate, that you still try to get a foot in the door.
But that's not true, though, that I get a foot in the door, because the reality is that if I have tried to say no to journalists, it's a very tough business. And it's what would you have done if I had said no? Would you have?
You did say no.
I know, but if I had insisted on it, if I had continued to say no, would you have scratched us? Would you have taken us from the list?
Probably, because if I can't interview you, I can't shoot in the church. I can't shoot during a service. I have no partner I can talk to. I would assume, and that's another question I would have, that you also take influence on your community. So I would assume that you say we do not participate. you would also find ways to make sure that I don't talk to other people.
Which you don't, that I don't. And now that you know the Berlin Project, I assume, right?
Did you or didn't you?
Now, would you really think that I was able to do that now that you know the Berlin Project? I mean, how would I do that?
Absolutely.
How?
I think that there is this inner circle that you discuss questions concerning the church. You have people who work for press or whatever who handle these things, and you are in personal contact with many of your members, or you don't call them member, but
so
of people coming to your church.
You really think that?
Of course, I think you would find ways to get out that you rather not want to participate.
Yeah, I would do that.
Would
I could do that, but
would you or could you?
But I never did that, and I wouldn't do it.
Yeah, you did agree, but if you had decided for yourself you don't not want to participate, would you try to influence your community?
I wouldn't, and it's kind of surprising. I mean, it's surprising. How do you really think that if I would make an announcement on Sunday morning that we don't want to speak to Sabrina Dittus, do you really think that people would adhere to that?
No, but I think there are different ways to do it. As you are in touch with most of the members or with many of the people coming Sundays to the church or to the Babylon.
It's 500 people that are on a church Sunday there. I know about half of them by name.
But I find it interesting that you constantly try to minimize your role or the power that you have as the pastor of the Berlin Project. Why is it not possible to say, yes, I do have a lot of power, yes, I can influence people, yes, I do influence people?
Yeah, I have no problem with that. I always said that in the beginning. I have a huge amount of power as a pastor in a church. And that's also why when that power is misused, a pastor is out immediately. Which you don't see anywhere else. That's why a person like the former bishop of the Protestant church in Germany was out even when she was found drunken, driving, going over a red light. I mean, come on. But why was she out? Because people do invest trust, and there's no mercy, so to speak, at least for the first half year or year, to take somebody out when that trust is misused. I have no problem with that. But when you come to the moment of a knowledge production or of creating your movie, in that moment there is a steep difference.
Well, the moment you walk into the church, you do exercise power as well. And what is the position that you speak from? Do you speak
what's the
as
point
the
that you want to
pastor?
achieve? What's so important about it? Why we're stuck with that point? What is the important point for you to make about that?
Because we're talking about knowledge production. And you said that you stay away from certain subjects. At the same time, it is important for a church, a newer church like yours, to be contemporary and to talk about things that are important really for people in their daily life. And these are very young people that are in your church. So I imagine it to be very difficult that you try to talk about current subjects, but not to influence their opinion, be it socially, ethically, or politically. How can that be possible?
I think that a general perception, that a general influence is there. I think that this general influence is there, but it's just not. I think I never changed the opinion of anybody of which party to vote for.
Why do people go there? Why do they listen to you?
Exactly.
If not to get impulses from you or from your sermons.
Because there is another reason why they come that is solely spiritual, that you can only fathom or perceive if you enter that spiritual realm. That's the reason why 10 people come to the service. 8 find it maybe okay, because we're not entirely freaks, and the music was good, and there was coffee in the beginning, but only 2 stay, or 1 or 3, because they had a spiritual encounter, and they stay because there is another topic, there's another subject altogether. And that's the being moved by this message that there's love, that there's unconditional grace, that there's acceptance, and there are a gazillion ways to express that and to shape that and to tell people that every Sunday again. And that's our main product. Terrible word in the concept of a church, but that's what people want to. That's why they come back, I think.
But would you say then that every single one of your sermons in the end tries to convey only this one message?
Yeah, always the third point of my sermon. The first 2 points I try to explore the topic that's in the passage, and try to specify it, make it like, I don't know. And then the third point is always exactly that.
Okay.
But are we on point with our discussions in regard to the topic that
I
we are
think
supposed
knowledge
to?
production is super interesting.
Yeah.
So would you say you do produce knowledge or you don't produce knowledge?
I think we do produce knowledge because we produce in a very tangible way in regards to the sermons that you can download that are online. 7 years of weekly sermons to all kinds of Bible verses. You know, if you're interested in getting commentary on a certain verse, you might be able to find a sermon. And then also in a more abstract way, when it comes down to creating a certain experience or a certain atmosphere or a certain brand of Christianity, to use that word.
But I remember that you told me about one sermon where you talked about the role of women in the Bible or in Christianity. I don't remember it precisely. But so to talk about the role of women, would you say this is a merely religious or spiritual approach or subject?
But interestingly enough, though, the sermon was on steering into a liberal direction, right? So the sermon was on showing that even though when you read the New Testament, you find that women were not invited to leadership, that today we should have definitely equally women in leadership as also men. Yeah. And
but that's a strong influence or opinion making. And is it your personal opinion or is it the opinion of the head of the Berlin project then?
Oh, this, as the head of the Berlin project, you know, whenever I stand behind the microphone and preach the sermon, I of course speak at that of the Berlin project. I'm not saying that there is no guidance in certain aspects. You know, when there is a sermon on mercy, for example, of course we would encourage people to go and help their neighbors. We would encourage them to get involved with the refugee camp that's on our street that we take in influence and those kind of things, of course. But what I'm rejecting is the notion that we would come down very specifically on certain issues. And what I'm also rejecting is the notion that just because we are a Christian church, we of course have to stand for these certain conservative positions, which we don't. And it's also important to realize that even though these topics are handled, there's a plurality in the church, and it's not the first topic. It's simply not the first interest in the church. Because we're not a political party, and that's where I influence. Because that's where I strongly influence. Because we have quite a number of people. If people come from a mainline church, they expect the pastor to talk a lot about social justice, about environmental involvement, those kind of things. If you come from a free church, evangelical church, you expect the pastor to talk all the time about sexual issues. So that's where I influence, because I say no, the church is not about these two different perceptions of the world. It's about the experience of Christ, and I think that's one of the reasons why the church is so popular, because people can kind of get to more of the core of it, to 80% of the core of it, you know, and have their experiences there.
And would you say you aim towards winning more people for the church and speaking to a wider audience and reaching a wider public?
It depends on the season of the church. You know, when we feel we have the resources, then we open ourselves up. There are very specific ways how you can open the church or close the church. One is space. If you don't have enough space, you can't have more people in the church. But if you have a season where you have strength, where you have energy, where you have enough money to have a bigger room, of course, then this becomes a topic. Because there we see there is demand. You know, the church is full. The people are sitting on in the hallway sometimes. Those kind of things.
But what would you say is the impulse behind to find a place for more people to come together and to pray, or to reach more people and make more people returning to religious belief, or even to joining your church because you think you do it the right way?
I think it has a lot to do if being excited about something. You know, when I find and this is a trivial example, but the names are the same. If I find the best deal for a cell phone, I will tell everybody. And if I'm even excited about something important like God, I will tell people. I think it's a matter of excitement. Really. But we have to stop.
Thank you very much. We have to stop here on this point.